Hello, tonight. You open your eyes beneath a sky the color of powdered lapis lazuli, just before the bells of Florence begin to ring. The morning is tinted gold, the way only Tuscany knows how to do. Sunlight slips between stone towers, gliding along terracotta rooftops like melted butter. You stretch, slowly, on a warm stone bench in the Piazza della Signoria. There's something in the air. Not just the faint scent of almonds and street bread, but something larger, something electric. Renaissance, though no one's calling it that quite yet. Most people are just calling it a very good time to buy velvet. But be warned, you probably won't survive this journey, not from war or plague, but from an overwhelming appreciation for frescoes and an aggressive desire to wear puffed sleeves. So before you relax, consider liking and subscribing, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from, when, what time it is there. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background noise. And let's slowly begin tonight's voyage. You rise and step forward into the waking city, the stones beneath your feet still cool from the night. Florence moves with purpose, but without haste, as if everyone already knows they're living in a painting and there's no need to rush the brush. Merchants shout over bolts of silk, young boys chase pigeons through shafts of morning light, and somewhere nearby, a lute plays a tune so sweet you forget to care if it's out of tune. You drift toward the Arno River, its surface sparkling like a broken mirror. A barge floats lazily beneath the Ponte Vecchio, the old bridge clustered with shops that look like they were stacked by a tipsy god with a fondness for jewelry. A baker offers you a slice of warm bread with olives tucked inside. You eat it even though you weren't hungry. That's the Renaissance for you, overflowing and unnecessary in the best possible way. Historical fact: by the early 1400s, Florence was a thriving republic known for its banking power and patronage of the arts. The Medici family, who weren't technically royalty, managed to run the show with the elegance of a velvet-gloved iron hand. Their fingerprints are everywhere, from chapels to sculptures, to the sudden trend of naming your children Lorenzo. You wander into a narrow alley flanked by tall stone buildings, the kind that lean just enough to feel cozy, not threatening. Laundry flaps overhead like the banners of 100 minor dukes. A cat with one ear slinks past a marble statue of a lion and disappears into a wine shop near the Duomo, that impossibly massive dome Brunelleschi built without any glaw, so he climbed looms above you like a quiet challenge. You step inside the cathedral and are instantly swallowed by cool air and silence. Light pours through stained glass windows, pooling like melted gems on the floor. Someone is sweeping the nave, and the sound of bristles echoes off stone-like a whispered prayer. Marginal fact: the dome of Santa Maria del Fiore was such an architectural enigma that Brunelleschi had to invent new machines just to lift the materials. He also refused to share the full plans with anyone, which, to be fair, does sound like something a person who builds domes without glue would do. Outside, a crowd gathers around a street performer reciting lines from Dante, Florence's most famous poet and least successful politician. Children giggle as he throws in jokes the grown-ups pretend not to get. A nun walks past, rolling her eyes, but you're pretty sure she smiled. You turn into a courtyard filled with students debating, loudly in Latin, their hands gesturing wildly as if trying to reshape reality. One young man declares that ancient Greek texts should be read in Greek, and everyone else looks scandalized. Another argues that humans are the measure of all things, which causes an old professor to dramatically drop his inkpot. Scholars still debate whether these humanist ideals were revolutionary or just well-dressed. Nostalgia for Plato and company. Someone hands you a flyer advertising a philosophical duel at sunset. The winner gets a chicken and a poem written in their honor. You promise to attend, even though you know you'll forget. That's the charm of this place. So much beauty it spills over, unclaimed. As the sun climbs, the city warms, and a faint scent of citrus drifts from an orchard hidden behind monastery walls. You find a shaded bench near a public fountain and sit, watching artisans pass by with pigment-stained hands. You hear a woman ask a passing merchant if he thinks God prefers red or blue robes on the Virgin Mary. He says red. She rolls her eyes. You suspect this conversation has been happening for centuries. The day stretches onward like a silk ribbon, soft and winding. You pass a workshop where an apprentice grinds lapis lazuli into paint, his hands blue and trembling with care. The color is precious almost absurdly, so and reserved for only the most divine. Corners of a canvas dot. And here's the thing, Florence doesn't just believe in art, it builds cathedrals around it. It teaches its children to draw perspective before they can spell their own names. It funds artists the way some cities fund armies lavishly, and with ulterior motives, the Medici, who you finally glimpse inside their private chapel, whisper plans while kneeling at gold-leafed altars. Their prayers are part devotion, part political strategy. Their eyes are always scanning, watching the city they pretend to rule from behind the curtain. You lean back against the warm stone and close your eyes for a moment. Even in rest, Florence hums. There's a tension in the air, a quiet, creative friction. Not war, not yet, but the kind of pressure that turns pigment into masterpieces, faith into architecture, and borrowed Greek into bold new thought. Someone nearby begins humming a tune you don't recognize, but it fits. A blend of longing and beauty, of reverence and ambition. And for a moment, you feel the weight of it, all the marble, the math, the mythologies, and it feels like you're floating. But don't get too comfortable yet. There are still gods. To visit notebooks, to peek inside, an artist who may or may not invent helicopters. This is only the beginning. The breeze shifts, warmer now, laced with rosemary and charcoal smoke as you wander back into the walled heart of Florence. You follow the sound of murmured prayers and rhythmic footsteps into the courtyard of the church of San Lorenzo. The sun casts long fingers across the patterned stone as a quiet procession of monks glides by like shadows. But your eyes are drawn to a different kind of ritual, one involving pigments, pulleys, and a surprisingly large pile of half-eaten fruit. You've stumbled into Botticelli's world. Well, not literally, into Sandro Botticelli himself. You're fairly certain he'd notice a time-displaced tourist butt into the heart of his workshop. Inside a sunlit studio, canvases lean like gossiping aristocrats, half-finished and fully dramatic. Venus reclines in one corner, her hair caught like it's perpetually being tousled by divine hands. Over there, a cherub is being painted for the third time because the last version looked too smug. Sandro paces barefoot on the marble floor, muttering to himself about allegory and beauty and whether spring should wear flowers or bee flowers. His assistants scurry like caffeinated mice, grinding minerals and adjusting scaffolding, and one of them quietly eats an apple while pretending to varnish a halo. The scent of oil, turpentine, and sheer ambition fills the air. Historical fact: Botticelli's Primavera and the Birth of Venus are iconic examples of Florentine Renaissance art, celebrating classical mythology and idealized beauty. Commissioned by the powerful Medici family, These works blended pagan imagery with Christian undertones, though Sandro himself later destroyed many of his drawings during a religious awakening. Artists, dramatic then, dramatic now. You tiptoe past a painting of a saint who looks suspiciously like Lorenzo de' Medici, Florence's de facto ruler. The artist notices your curiosity and offers a wink. Everyone knows who pays the bills. In fact, the Medici don't just fund art, they weaponize it. Their palaces are temples of taste and soft power. Their portraits hang in churches, even if they technically never achieved sainthood unless counting economic miracles. As you walk, your hand brushes against a cold stone wall, carved with the family's similar cluster of mysterious balls, possibly coins, or possibly a really confusing fruit bowl. Scholars still debate the exact meaning of the Medici crest, though most agree it was designed to remind people of wealth and just enough mystery to seem mythological. You duck into a shadowed corridor in the Medici palace, where candlelight dances over silk tapestries and velvet-draped windows. A young clerk passes by with scrolls tucked under his arm, leges, letters, and possibly love notes. In the chamber ahead, Cosimo and Lorenzo whisper over maps and patronage requests. You hear one of them mutter, "If we pay for 10 altarpieces, maybe God won't notice the tax thing." Classic Renaissance logic, marginal fact. Lorenzo de' Medici once saved Botticelli from exile by personally intervening in a civic dispute over public decency. Botticelli's art pushed visual boundaries, but Florence's politics were often even more scandalous than its naked Venuses. Outside, the streets fill with noise, carts rolling, bells ringing, and a child reciting poetry while balancing a pigeon on his head. You follow a street musician into a square where people are gathering to watch a puppet show. It's a retelling of the Iliad with cardboard armor and way too much fake blood, but the crowd eats it up. Someone passes you a fig soaked in honey. You accept. It's sticky and also transcendent. Just beyond the square, the Dominican friar Savonarola thunders from a raised pulpit about the vanities of the city, the paintings, the perfumes, the pagan tales being painted on sacred walls. His voice cracks like thunder as he calls for a bonfire of the vanities, demanding the people of Florence cast their mirrors and musical instruments into the flames. You blink slowly. Botticelli will eventually toss some of his own sketches into that fire, but not yet. For now, the city still burns with beauty, not condemnation, as the sun slips lower. You wander into the gardens of the Medici villa outside the city. The scent of oranges clings to the breeze, and marble statues peer through hedges like ancient paparazzi. Peacocks shuffle across the gravel, self-important and slightly suspicious of your presence. A scholar reads aloud from Plato beneath an olive tree, while two ladies nearby compare shades of embroidered thread in the dying light. Kamjagi wins, as it always does. You lean against a cool stone wall and stare at a fresco, half faded by time and weather. Two gods are embracing in a swirl of wind and flowers, maybe Zephyrus and Chloris. Or maybe it's just a really good metaphor for artistic obsession. The paint still clings stubbornly to the plaster, like memory refusing to fade. You sigh deeply, and a breeze stirs the ivy above you. Botticelli's world is more than paint and myth. It's a stage for power, passion, and panic in equal measure. The Medici don't just commission beauty, they curate their own legend. Every mural, every saint's face borrowed from a cousin, every ceiling transformed into an ode to philosophy or fertility. It's all storytelling. It's all control. And you, lucky dreamer, are caught in the current. You pass one last scene as the sky darkens. A young apprentice carries a basket of crushed minerals, malachite for green, cinnabar for red, and a pinch of gold leaf, carefully wrapped in parchment. He doesn't speak. He just smiles shyly and disappears into a side door, leaving a faint trail of color behind him. A bell chimes somewhere distant. A shutter closes above you. The pigeons settle in for the night, and somewhere behind thick stone walls, a rich man opens a letter sealed with red wax and smiles. Another commission approved. Another chance to shape the world through myth and marble. You keep walking. Florence isn't asleep yet, but it's dreaming, always dreaming. You cross the Arno River beneath a sky blooming with soft lavender light, the kind that makes everything look like it's been painted by someone with an expensive brush and too much sentiment. The Ponte Vecchio arches ahead of you like a stone, spine-lined with shimmering teeth goldsmith shops, glittering with promise and maybe just a hint of pickpocketing. You drift with the evening crowd, a quiet stream of cloaks, candles, and whispers, until you find yourself drawn into a far more peculiar current. You've arrived at a workshop where the smell of burning oil, wet clay, and slightly singed hair hangs heavy in the air. A young man crouches over a strange mechanism that appears to be equal parts crossbow, bird skeleton, and wild guess. His brow is furrowed, his fingers stained with ink and soot, and he's mumbling something about the weight of air and the arrogance of birds. You found Leonardo, not yet Da Vinci to the world, but definitely Leonardo to everyone who has to deal with his constant experiments, accidental fires, and unprompted dissections. He glances up only briefly as you enter, then gestures vaguely to a stool. You sit, or at least, you try to. It collapses immediately under you. He doesn't notice. He's already moved on to sketching a spiral staircase powered by magnets and moonlight. Historical fact: Leonardo da Vinci kept thousands of pages of sketches, notes, and mirrored writing in journals throughout his life, covering everything from anatomy to helicopters to musical instruments that probably wouldn't pass inspection today. You peer over his shoulder as he scratches out the form of a horse mid-lep, each muscle rendered like it's been studied in motion, which, knowing Leonardo, it probably has. The man had a habit of sneaking into morgues and poking around places no polite guest should be poking. Scholars still debate whether he ever actually finished anything. His notebooks are filled with brilliance, but most of his inventions remained unrealized, his commissions unfinished, his distractions legendary. On the table beside him, there's a half-carved block of marble, a detailed drawing of a water-powered saw, and a very annoyed-looking mechanical lion missing one paw. You suspect the paw is in the chicken coop. You don't ask. A servant enters and places a dish of olives, cheese, and what might be roasted eel on a dusty shelf. Leonardo doesn't notice. He's now balancing on one foot, using the other to adjust a pulley that lifts a wooden wing attached to a mannequin wearing a bedsheet toga. You think this might be a test flight. You also think you should step back. Marginal fact: Leonardo once designed a robotic knight powered by gears and pulley, essentially a 15th century automaton that could sit, wave its arms, and even open its jaw. He also never told anyone why he built it, which is somehow even more Leonardo. Later that night, you follow him into the streets of Florence. He walks quickly, head tilted back, watching the stars like they owe him answers. He stops to sketch the shadow of a tower on a crumpled bit of parchment, then spends 5 minutes arguing with a sleeping cat about structural tension. You're not entirely sure who wins. Eventually, he leads you into a quiet garden near the cloisters of Santa Maria Novella. He kneels and plucks a flower, holding it up to the moonlight. Symmetry, he mutters. God hides geometry in everything. You think about that. Then you sneeze, loudly, because Renaissance gardens do not care about your pollen allergies. Leonardo pats your shoulder absent-mindedly and begins drawing the cross-section of your nasal cavity from memory. He's like that dot. You leave him eventually, still murmuring about vortices and the angle of feathersand. Make your way to the studio of another rising star. The room is brighter, the brush strokes bolder, the vibe significantly more confident. You've entered the orbit of Michelangelo. Buonarroti. The man is sculpting like the marble personally insulted his mother. Every strike of the chisel echoes like thunder, each motion a declaration of war. He barely notices you standing in the corner. His tunic is splattered with dust and sweat, and his eyes burn with the intensity of someone who both reveres and resents his talent. You hear him whisper something to the block. I see you, David. Just hold still. Historical fact. Michelangelo began sculpting the statue of David in 1501 from a single slab of flawed marble that had been abandoned for decades. He famously claimed that he could see the figure inside the stone and simply removed the excess. You circled the half-formed figure, already magnificent, its sinews emerging from the stone like a god shrugging off sleep. The contrast to Leonardo's chaotic brilliance is striking. Where Leonardo floats, Michelangelo anchors. He believes in divine form, in human strength, in the idea that perfection is not imagined but excavated. Michelangelo mutters about the Pope, the ceiling, and how no one appreciates good ankles anymore. You don't interrupt. He might turn the chisel on you. Marginal fact. Despite his talent, Michelangelo hated painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling, calling it a punishment rather than a commission. He preferred sculpture, claiming painting was fit only for women and idlers, which is a lot of energy for someone covered in paint for 4 years. The two men will never get along, you think. Too different, dissimilar. Scholars still debate the nature of their rivalry. Though it was mostly one-sided, Michelangelo reportedly found Leonardo pretentious, while Leonardo considered Michelangelo angry and unwashed. Fair. You step out once more into the night. Florence. Dreaming behind you, stars wheeling above. In the distance, someone plays a lute. The city's sighs, a heartbeat of art and intellect and barely managed egos. You wonder if these men know, if they feel how their obsessions will ripple outward, through time, how their failures will inspire, how their sketches will become sacred, how their quarrels will become legend. Maybe they do, or maybe, like most geniuses, they're just trying to get through the week without accidentally setting fire to their curtains again. The sky deepens to navy blue. The streets empty, the workshop doors close, but the dreams, those wild, golden Renaissance dreams, they never quite sleep. You drift into the quieter corners of Florence, past the clang of workshops and the heated arguments of artists over perspective and pigment. The crowd's thin, the smells of baked bread and wood smoke mellow, and you find yourself drawn toward something subtler. Low hum of language, the faint rustle of parchment, and the gentle crack of candle wax cooling in an ink-stained room. This is the home of letters, of words, of thoughts wrapped tightly in vellum and sealed with a scholar's sigh. You arrive at the studiolo of a wealthy merchant, small windowless retreat lined with books, illuminated manuscripts, and the occasional smug bust of Cicero glaring down judgmentally. Inside, two men are speaking in Latin, one in perfectly measured tones, the other with the self-satisfied flair of someone who has definitely written at least 3 biting essays about the fall of man. You've walked into a meeting of humanists, historical. Fact, Renaissance humanism was a movement focused on the revival of classical literature, philosophy, and history, emphasizing the value and agency of human beings. It shaped everything from art to politics and made Latin very fashionable again at the table. A man with a soft beard and sharper tongue gestures toward a passage from Livy. The past, he says, must not merely be preserved, it must be lived anew. You nod, as if you totally understand the Latin passage he's pointing at. You don't. It's upside down. The man speaking is Poggio Brocciolini, book hunter, scribe, and arguably the reason we even have half the classical texts that survive today. In between copying Cicero and arguing with monks, he sneaked into forgotten monasteries and rescued dusty scrolls like they were ancient gold. And in a way, they were. Marginal fact, Poggio discovered a copy of Lucretius's De Rerum Natura in a German monastery in the early 15th century, a radical Epicurean text that had been lost for centuries and may have influenced the scientific worldview of modern Europe. The other man in the room, younger, impatient, already thinking in paragraphs, is Leonardo Bruni. He's deep into rewriting Roman history, but this time with a spin. More civic pride, more virtue, and definitely more Florence. He's convinced that good government and good Latin are practically the same thing. You suspect he might draft a constitution just for fun. They debate the nature of liberty, virtue, and whether Cicero was more stylish than Seneca. Scholars still debate the actual impact of Bruni's writings on later republics, but there's no denying his work set the foundation for modern historical narrative. You back slowly away from the philosophical ping-pong match, but not before accidentally knocking over a bust of Plato. You pretend it was like that when you got here. Outside, the air smells like lavender and ink. You walk through a garden where students gather to read aloud, some in Latin, some in Greek, one definitely pretending to understand both. A crow watches from a cypress tree, probably judging everyone's grammar. You follow a stone path past an open loggia, where a young woman in saffron robes copies poetry with precise, deliberate strokes. Her name is Cassandra Fettel, and though most of the men around her still write as if women belong solely in tragedies or laundry lists, she's out here quoting Aristotle and winning every debate in 3 sentences or fewer. Historical fact. Cassandra Fettel was one of the most celebrated female scholars of the Renaissance, writing eloquent Latin letters and giving public orations that earned her admiration from scholars and popes alike. She catches your eye and smiles slightly, then returns to her work. You notice the pages beside her are filled with metaphors comparing wisdom to wind and ignorance to damp laundry. Okay, maybe not that last part, but you're getting tired, and that metaphor is surprisingly tempting later. In the Grand Library of San Marco, you trace your fingers across rows of beautifully bound volumes, each illuminated by hand, some edged with gold so delicate it could flake away under a breath. You find a copy of Plato translated by Marsilio Ficino. Yes, that Marsilio Ficino, the man who once claimed that love, when properly harnessed, could quite literally move the stars. Marginal fact, Ficino, under the patronage of Cosimo de' Medici, translated all of Plato's works into Latin and infused Renaissance thinking with Neoplatonism. believing that beauty could elevate the soul toward divine understanding. You linger on one passage about the soul's longing for truth. Then you flip to the back and find someone's very rude doodle of Aristotle wearing a goat hat. Even the Renaissance had its class clowns. As night settles in, you climb the steps of a university tower where a group of students sip thin wine and argue about Petrarch's sonnets versus Boccaccio's prose. You nod along, sipping nothing, saying nothing, just watching their eyes light up with the thrill of knowing something deeply and wanting so badly to explain it. One of them turns to you and asks, "Do you think a good life is better than a famous one?" You think about it. You think about Petrarch, father of humanism, who once climbed a mountain just to say he did it, and then wrote a heartfelt letter to St. Augustine about it afterward. You think about Erasmus, who would later spend his life fixing commas in Greek manuscripts and fighting with Luther in the margins. You think about your own life, quiet perhaps, but attentive. I think you say softly that a good life leaves behind the best words. They all pause, nod, and raise their clay cups. Then one of them spills theirs all over a priceless manuscript and is promptly asked to leave. The candles burn lower, the books grow heavier. Somewhere a bell tolls. Midnight, you lie beneath a fig tree in a quiet courtyard, the air thick with jasmine and starlight. The words and thinkers of this era float gently in your mind: Pico's manifestos, Ficino's soul-soaring theories, Bruni's hopeful histories. Not all of them will survive, but enough will. Just enough to stitch a golden thread through time. You close your eyes and fall asleep to the rhythm of parchment being turned, words being shared, and the hush of a world rediscovering its voice. You wake softly, quietly. Dawn slips over the rooftops of Florence like a pale ribbon unspooling across terracotta and mist. The bells ring again, not in alarm or prayer this time, but in rhythm. Their song calls not to scholars or monks, but to sculptors, painters, and the people who make paint from crushed beetles and questionable minerals. You're heading into the workshop district now, where Renaissance art begins, not with inspiration, but with powdered marble under the fingernails, and weeks spent staring at blank walls. So glamorous, inside one of these shadowy rooms, part stable, part shrine to chaos, a young apprentice grinds lapis lazuli into dust, humming a tavern song about someone named Lucia with the lazy eye. You nod approvingly. Great beat. Next to him, an older man with a deep-set frown and streaks of ochre in his beard slashes a brush across damp plaster. This is born fresco, and if he makes one mistake, he has to scrape the whole wall and start again. So no pressure, historical fact. Fresco painting involved applying pigment onto wet plaster, making the artwork part of the wall itself immovable, permanent, and maddeningly unforgiving. The artist pauses, steps back, squints at the half-finished face of a saint, and mutters something that definitely isn't Latin. You take a step back, maybe two. This is where it happens, where the Renaissance becomes visible, tactile, and, quite frankly, expensive. And at the center of it all is a name already whispered across the city. Masaccio doesn't paint like the others. He doesn't drape angels in theatrical poses or give everyone suspiciously identical cheekbones. His figures have weight, presence, and the kind of downcast eyes that make you want to give them a hug and maybe a hot meal. You step into the Brancusi chapel and are nearly knocked over by the sheer volume of realism. The figures seem caught mid-thought, mid-life. You see sadness, confusion, wonder, all the things saints weren't really supposed to show before this guy started messing with tradition. Marginal fact in the tribute money. Masaccio was among the first to use consistent light sources and vanishing point perspective within a narrative scene, creating a spatial realism that astonished his contemporaries. You lean closer. The apostle on the left is pointing, the tax collector is frowning, and Peter is doing at least 3 things in one painting. It's like a biblical comic, strip with incredible lighting and emotionally complex beards. And here's the wild part. Masaccio died in his 20s. Scholars still debate how much of his work was finished before his sudden death, and whether his innovations would have gone even further if he'd lived past his lunch break. As you leave the chapel, you find the city changed. Painters now talk about light like it's a deity, and perspective grids are the new black. Across Florence, artists squabble over shadows and foreshortening like bakers arguing over whose focaccia is fluffier. You make your way to a quieter street, where a shy young sculptor is chiseling a block of Carrara marble under an awning. His hands move with care, as if he's freeing a figure that's already in there. Just ... shy ... His name is Donatello, not the Turtle, and he's about to do something truly strange. Give bronze a soul in a nearby church niche. You see his David knot, the famous hunk of white marble, but an earlier one, youthful, slim, and wearing a hat that looks like it was stolen from a Venetian tavern girl. But this David is different. He's contemplative, maybe even smug. He's standing on Goliath's head, like he's wondering if anyone saw the whole thing, or if he'll have to explain it at dinner. Historical fact. Donatello's bronze David was the first freestanding nude male sculpture cast in bronze since antiquity, reviving a classical form that had been dormant for 1,000 years. The pose is relaxed, the expression unsettling. There's something both ancient and deeply modern in an adolescent caught in a moment between victory and confusion. Sword still in hand, feathers brushing his leg. It's kind of weird, and that's exactly why it works. Scholars still debate whether Donatello's David is meant to represent civic virtue, divine intervention, or just teenage moodiness in metallic form. You step back out into the sun, where light paints its own masterpiece across the red roofs. Every building feels touched by geometry now. The city has become a canvas of arches, domes, and mathematically suspicious proportions. A boy rushes past you carrying a wooden frame covered in strings. It's a perspective grid used by artists to trick the eye into seeing depth. You remember that before this century, people thought space was just ... flat. Wild. You sit near a fountain where 2 painters are arguing over whether blue should be used sparingly, reverently, or just not at all because it's insanely expensive. One of them insists it must be reserved for the Virgin Mary, the other is using it on a duck. Later that evening, you wander into the workshop of Fra Angelico, who's quietly turning prayer into pigment. His angels don't hover ominously, shimmer with quiet joy. He insists on praying before each brushstroke, as if heaven itself is supervising, which, honestly, might be the ultimate performance review. You pause before one of his Annunciation panels and feel something rare, calm. The colors are soft, the gold subtle, the figures open and tender. It feels less like a story and more like a whisper. You wonder if beauty, pure, intentional beauty, is its own kind of gospel. The workshop closes. The doors creak. The city sighs under a violet sky. You find a seat on a worn stone bench, somewhere between the baptistry and the bell tower, and watch as artists head home, some stained with oil, others with ideas too large to hold. The bells ring again. This time, they seem to echo through your bones. Not everyone in this city can draw, sculpt, or paint, but everyone feels the change. It's not just about saints and shadows anymore. It's about truth, depth, the soul revealed one brushstroke at a time, and as sleep pulls at your thoughts like soft linen. You know that in this city of restless genius, even dreams are drafted in perspective. The air this morning smells of bread, beeswax, and something else sink. A different kind of craft is rising now, not in marble or paint, but on parchment and pages, one letter at a time. You pass a young boy with purple-stained fingertips, sprinting through the streets, hollering something about new pages from Germany, which is either very exciting or deeply ominous. You follow the smell and the smudges into a narrow shop where blocks of wood are stacked. Like firewood, and strange mirrored letters are arranged on trays. It's louder in here than any Presses groan, hands slap paper into place, ink hisses. You've just walked into a print shop at the dawn of a revolution that won't come with fanfare but with footnotes. Historical fact: Johannes Gutenberg's movable type printing press, developed in the mid-15th century, revolutionized the spread of information by enabling the mass production of books. One man leans over a freshly inked sheet like it's a holy relic, eyes darting over the black smudge of Latin text as if trying to absorb the wisdom through his pores. Another worker carefully wipes ink from a carved block. The illustration for a herb manual, showing something suspiciously like a dandelion, but with the gravitas of a royal crest. You pick up a cooling page. It crackles faintly between your fingers. It's a calendar, or maybe a prayer, or both. Welcome to the democratization of knowledge, where monks and merchants alike can own the same words. Over in the corner, a merchant in fine wool inspects a bundle of new pamphlets, frowning at one, laughing at another. The press hasn't just printed Bibles, it's printed jokes, gossip, poems, and political jabs. You notice a page with a crude drawing of a bishop slipping on olive oil. The caption reads, "Even saints have bad days." Marginal fact: some of the earliest bestsellers after Gutenberg's press weren't religious texts at Albert calendars, indulgence certificates, and how-to guides for things like beer brewing and bird keeping. And now, word is spreading fast, not just through cities like Mainz or Venice, but into places where literacy was once a privilege, now becoming a hobby. Reading, once a monk's quiet pastime, is now a loud market affair. Outside, you bump into a man who insists he's seen the future. His hands are ink-stained, and he's got the wild-eyed look of someone who hasn't slept since Wednesday. His name is Aldus Manutius, and he's about to make books. Smaller, more portable, personal. He walks fast, talks faster, and dreams in italics. Literally, historical fact: Aldus Manutius, a Venetian printer, revolutionized printing by inventing italic type and popularizing portable octavo editions, books small enough to carry, read, and hide from judgmental dinner guests. You duck into a Venetian canal-side shop where he's testing something newer, thin book of Virgil, light enough to slip into a pocket and printed with such care it feels like poetry even before it's read. He talks about access, about how scholars in distant villages will finally hold the ancients in their hands. Scholars still debate whether the printing press truly caused the Renaissance or simply amplified it, but either way, the written word is now a wildfire, and Aldus is holding the match. You pass a university courtyard where students shout across tables about Plato, Cicero, and someone named Petrarch. who just gets me. There are books everywhere, scattered, stacked, traded like currency. For the first time, knowledge has resale value. Not far from here, a teacher holds up 2 editions of Aristotle, one handwritten, one printed, and asks his class, which one is truer? Nobody answers. Probably because that's a deeply unfair pop quiz. Later, in a quiet church library, you find a woman alone, hunched over a page with a magnifying lens. She's writing marginalian notes in the margins, thoughts scribbled in the glow of candlelight. She smiles at you and says softly, "They'll never know I was here, unless they read between the lines." You watch the candle flicker, lighting her face in golden ripples. Books don't just preserve knowledge, they absorb voices. Ink becomes thought. And suddenly, people like her who were once only readers become writers. Quietly, persistently, outside. In the streets of Florence again, the print shop boys are running wild, waving fresh flyers announcing a new poem, a political satire, or a particularly juicy confession by a cardinal. People crowd the stalls like they're lining up for a rock concert, except the rock star is Ovid, and he's been dead for 1,000 years. You spot a boy selling pages one by one. You ask him what he's holding. A list of banned books, he says proudly, and this one's already sold out. You smile. Nothing travels faster than forbidden ideas, except maybe a bad haircut as the sun dips. You take one of those tiny books and sit beneath a fountain shaped like Neptune, holding a fish that looks mildly annoyed. You flip through the pages as bells ring out across the city again. The words feel alive. They hum in your fingertips. You read slowly, softly, letting the sound of water and evening chatter fill the gaps. You imagine what it would have been like, a century ago, to wait months, years for a single copy of this page. Now, you've got it in your lap, slightly wrinkled and probably smeared with olive oil. But it's yours. And in this moment, you feel it the shift. Not in art, not in war, but in thought. Thoughts that travel, uninvited and uncontained. You close the book gently, and the weight in your hands is small but infinite. Somewhere nearby, another press creaks to life. The future is already being printed. It's early morning in Florence, and you're awoken by ... laughter. In the Renaissance, that's either a wedding or a duel. Turns out, it's neither, just 2 artists arguing over whose statue has the better abs. You stretch, stand, and walk toward the noise, drawn by the scent of stone, dust, oil, and whatever pigment smells like crushed dreams. You're in a sculpture workshop, where hunks of marble tower like sleeping giants, and every corner is filled with limestone ones, thankfully. A man in a paint-smeared apron gestures dramatically at a half-finished torso, muttering about proportion, anatomy, and how nobody respects the gluteus maximus anymore. Welcome to the age of art's rebirth, not just in paintings, but in form, movement, and the sacred geometry of the human body. Historical fact: Renaissance artists reintroduced the use of classical Greco-Roman techniques, such as contrapposto, depicting the human figure in dynamic balance. Shifting away from medieval flatness, you glance at a nearby sketch pinned to the wall. It's not just a figure, it's an entire diagram of muscles, bones, veins. One artist walks in carrying a freshly plucked chicken and says he's going to study it for the wings, which sounds either deeply artistic or mildly suspicious. You're introduced to a man named Leonardo, not the Ninja Turtle, unfortunately, but the other one. Yes, that one. He's standing in front of a large wooden board, furiously scribbling diagrams that look like part bird, part submarine, part daydream. He turns to you mid-thought and asks, "Have you ever considered how a bat flies?" Leonardo da Vinci smells, faintly, of linseed oil and midnight ideas. He talks while pacing, hands always moving, sketching machines that could fly, dissecting cadavers in secret, painting saints with sly smiles. The man makes to-do lists that include draw the moons, reflection in a puddle, and build a mechanical lion. Your to-do list looks embarrassed in your pocket. Marginal fact: Leonardo's notebooks were famously written in mirror script right, to left, possibly to protect his ideas, or because he was left-handed and wanted to avoid smudging ink. You spend the day following him around as he leaps from painting to engineering to dissecting a lily for its emotional geometry. At one point, he hands you a sketch and asks if you think this bridge could hold elephants. You don't know how to answer, so you nod solemnly and say, "Only the polite ones." In a neighboring studio, another genius is at work. Michelangelo. He's arguing with a block of marble. No, really arguing. You hear him growl, "There's an angel trapped in here, and I must set him free." And somehow, this doesn't sound insane. You watch him work, each strike of the chisel echoing with purpose. Stone flakes dance in the sunlight. The room smells of minerals and sweat and stubborn genius. Historical fact: Michelangelo's David, completed in 1504, was carved from a previously discarded block of marble, transforming a flawed material into one of history's most iconic sculptures. He barely eats, barely sleeps, and seems to exist entirely on granite dust and unfiltered ambition. At one point, someone tells him to take a break, and he glares as if rest is a personal insult. You make a mental note never to suggest self-care to him. Scholars still debate whether Michelangelo saw himself more as a sculptor or a reluctant painter, especially after being roped into painting the Sistine Chapel's ceiling, which he completed mostly lying on his back, muttering Latin curses at the Pope. You slip into the chapel one morning, light filtering in from high windows, catching just enough of the painted ceiling to feel vertigo in your soul. The figures above seem to float, twist, and breathe a kind of divine ballet frozen in pigment. Nearby, Raphael is sketching a face with a calm intensity, whispering compliments to his charcoal. His workshop is filled with warmth, harmony, and that one assistant who keeps misplacing brushes. Raphael smiles more, draws faster, and somehow makes it all look effortless, like a god doodling on a Sunday afternoon. Back in the open plaza, artists huddle under canopies, debating the ethics of light and shadow. One claims that chiaroscuro, the dramatic contrast of light and dark, is the true measure of soul. Another says, it's all in the eyelashes. You pretend to take notes, but mostly you're just enjoying the espresso someone handed you. A child runs by holding a stick like a paintbrush, shouting, "I'm Botticelli," and drawing swirls in the dust. You hope the real Botticelli would be prouder, at least mildly amused. Later, you wander into a small chapel off a side street. It's quiet, dim. You light a candle and turn to see a fresco that looks like it was painted with whispered prayers. The colors are faded, the edges worn, but it pulses with feeling hope, grief, beauty. Art here isn't about spectacle, it's about presence. You pass a man polishing the feet of a statue, murmuring that beauty is a form of devotion. He doesn't look up. You sit for a moment, watching the candle flame flicker, and you realize this is a time when hands bring heaven to earth, when stone remembers motion and color remembers breath. Outside, in the golden hush of twilight, the city breathes. Florence glows like a painting. Pigeons flutter past statues, and laughter drifts down from balconies. You lean against a column and think about everything you've seen. The restless minds, the stubborn hands, the moments where art became a kind of resurrection. A man passes by singing a love song about a woman's eyebrows, and someone throws down a rose from a window. It lands near your feet, and for a moment, it feels like the whole world has been sculpted into something softer. You exhale. The morning mist is still lifting when you find yourself drifting toward the domes and towers of a bustling Italian court, specifically the court of the Medici family. Yes, those Medici, bankers by trade, puppet masters by reputation, and patrons of basically everyone with a paintbrush, a telescope, or a philosophical grievance. You step past elaborately dressed guards, each one wearing more feathers than a particularly ambitious swan, and into the palazzo, where marble corridors echo with soft lute music and whispered political schemes. Today's lesson: the Renaissance wasn't just pigment and parchment, it was power. Real, velvet-gloved, gold-plated influence wrapped in flowing robes and family emblems. Historical fact: the Medici family of Florence were central patrons of the Renaissance, funding artists like Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo, while also producing several popes and marrying into European royalty. Lorenzo de' Medici, Il Magnifico himself, stands before you in a brocade tunic the color of mulled wine. He's gesturing animatedly with a poet on one side, a mathematician on the other, and a nervous-looking chef holding a tray of figs. There's a lot going on. Lorenzo winks at you and says, "Florence runs on three things: gold, gossip, and genius, sometimes not in that order." A servant offers you candied lemon peels and a scroll of Latin poetry. You're not sure which one to eat, so you just smile and nod politely. You drift through the rooms, watching courtiers perform the subtle ballet of politics, bowing, flattering, insulting each other in perfect iambic pentameter. It's all very glamorous, until someone gets exiled for using the wrong fork. Scholars still debate the exact balance of civic pride and raw ambition that made Florence the crucible of Renaissance innovation. But one thing's clear: the city's lifeblood flowed through Medici vaults. You enter a quieter chamber where a young woman recites lines from Petrarch, her voice soft but unshakable. Her name is Lucretia Tornabuon, Lorenzo's mother and a poet in her own right. She offers you a seat beside her and explains how verse and virtue must live side by side. Also, how to properly scold a bishop without causing a scandal. You take notes. Marginal fact: Lucretia wrote devotional poetry and played a key role in shaping Medici diplomacy long before women were supposed to wield influence. She simply ... did. Elsewhere in the city, you wander through workshops, paid for by Medici patronage. One artist grumbles about a delayed payment. Another insists he was meant to paint ceilings because he's emotionally vertical. You're not sure what that means, but you believe him. At the Platonic Academy, a gathering of philosophers debates whether love is a ladder to the divine or just really elaborate heartbreak. The argument is interrupted when someone brings in wine and a plate of olives, because even enlightenment needs snacks as evening draws near. You're invited to a private performance, a new play penned by a court playwright and inspired, naturally, by classical mythology and awkward dinner parties. You sit beneath candlelit arches as actors in embroidered robes recite lines of beauty, betrayal, and moral ambiguity. There's a goddess disguised as a shepherd, a mortal man turned into a tree, and one character who seems to exist only to deliver elaborate metaphors about cheese. Everyone applauds wildly. A Medici cousin claims it was profoundly moving, though he may be weeping because his wine glass is empty. You step outside during intermission and find yourself in the Palazzo's garden sculptures of Venus and Apollo bathed in twilight. Fragrant herbs brushing against your sleeves, a nightingale starting to sing as if on cue, and then fireworks. Modest ones, of course it's only Tuesday, but even their soft crackle against the sky feels symbolic. Like the Renaissance itself is throwing you a glittery wink. Later, you find yourself seated at a banquet table beside a visiting scholar from Constantinople who's teaching Latin speakers how to read Greek. He explains that without the Medici, half the classical texts rediscovered might still be gathering dust in abandoned monasteries. Historical fact: Cosimo de' Medici established one of the first libraries in Florence to house classical manuscripts collected from across Europe and the Middle East, fostering a revival of ancient knowledge across the table. A young architect sketches the outline of a dome that might someday rival the Pantheon, while another guest insists that banking is basically poetry with numbers. You nod, but privately think your bank app would strongly disagree. The evening winds down with dancing, and you're gently pulled into a slow circle by a woman who says she's descended from Cicero's cousin. You believe her. Everyone here seems slightly mythical. The air smells of rosemary, wine, beeswax, candles, and ambition as you leave the court. A boy hands you a folded parchment containing a riddle. It's from Lorenzo, he says. He likes to keep minds sharp. You read the riddle. It's about time, art, and the sound marble makes when it dreams. You don't know the answer, but that's okay, because in this glittering world of whispered power and candlelit masterpieces, asking the right question is already a kind of brilliance. The soft glow of dawn finds you wandering the lively streets of Venice, where water replaces roads and gondolas glide like slow-moving whispers beneath stone bridges and towering campaniles. The salty scent of the lagoon mingles with freshly baked bread, and the calls of merchants echo through narrow alleys, blending with distant chants from churches. Here, trade isn't just commerce, a dance of diplomacy, danger, and dazzling spectacle. You pass masked figures preparing for a masquerade ball, their costumes bursting with rich fabrics of camjegi, saffron cerise, and deep keston, reflecting the city's flair for both mystery and extravagance. This is a city that thrives on paradox, the refined elegance of art and music, tempered by the gritty reality of political intrigue and looming threats from rival powers. Historical fact: Venice was a major maritime republic during the Renaissance, renowned for its naval power and control of trade routes between East and West, which helped it become a wealthy and culturally vibrant city-state. You find yourself in the grand halls of the Doge's palace, where ornate Gothic arches frame scenes of triumph and betrayal, and where the Doge himself listens intently to envoys bearing news from distant lands. Nearby, the Council of Ten operates in shadowy chambers, its members cloaked in secrecy and power, balancing justice with espionage. A gondolier offers you a ride through the labyrinthine canals, his voice low as he recounts tales of spies and stolen manuscripts that shaped the fate of empires. You listen, the rhythmic splash of oars creating a soothing yet suspenseful soundtrack. Scholars still debate how much Venice's unique political structure, part oligarchy, part republic, enabled it to survive amidst the shifting tides of Renaissance Europe, but its resilience is undeniable as twilight settles. You watch from a stone balcony as the city lights shimmer on water like scattered stars. Music drifts up from a nearby piazza, where a lute player strums haunting melodies, and couples twirl in velvet and lace beneath paper lanterns. Marginal fact: Venetian glassmakers guarded their secrets fiercely, and the island of Murano became legendary for producing exquisite glass art that dazzled courts across Europe in a shadowed alley. You glimpse a secret meeting of scholars exchanging forbidden texts, surly whispers of scientific revolution and humanism that would soon ripple far beyond these canals. Later, you find warmth in a crowded tavern where poets declaim verses in Venetian dialect, and merchants boast of spices and silks destined for distant palaces. You sip spiced wine and marvel at the blend of cultures, the East and West, colliding in a kaleidoscope of color, sound, and scent. As night deepens, masked revelers fill the streets, laughter mixing with the occasional clatter of a hidden dagger. You're reminded that beneath the city's beauty lies a razor-edger, constant balancing act between opulence and survival. You step onto a bridge, watching the moon's reflection ripple gently beneath you, thinking about the delicate, shimmering thread that holds Venice together, city of light, shadow, and endless stories waiting to unfold. You find yourself amid the vibrant chaos of Florence's bustling piazza, where the scent of fresh leather and polished marble mingles with the faint sweetness of blooming orange trees, their camgbeggy leaves shimmering under the golden afternoon sun. Artists and merchants jostle for space, while philosophers debate loudly beneath the imposing silhouette of the Palazzo Vecchio, its tower a constant reminder of civic pride and power. The streets pulse with creative energy. Sculptors chisel marble blocks, painters mix pigments in earthy saffron, cerisque, and deep Keston hues, and poets recite verses inspired by the city's storied past and uncertain future. Everywhere, the Renaissance breathes through the stones, alive in the sweat and ambition of its people. Historical fact: Florence was the cradle of the Renaissance, fueled by the patronage of powerful families like the Medici, who championed art, science, and political reform, transforming the city into a beacon of cultural rebirth. You stroll through the Uffizi Gallery, catching glimpses of Botticelli's ethereal figures and Leonardo da Vinci's meticulous sketches, works that still inspire awe centuries later. Nearby, the Ponte Vecchio arches over the Arno River, its shops overflowing with goldsmiths' treasures, reflecting the city's wealth and refinement. In a shaded courtyard, you overhear a heated discussion about the role of humanism, the idea that man rather than divine decrees the key to knowledge and progress. Scholars still debate how much this philosophy challenged the Church's authority, but its impact on art, politics, and science is undeniable. Marginal fact: Florence's citizens were known for their extravagant fashion, with velvet and silk, dyed in rich shades of camgebeggy and saffron cerisque, signaling social status and family allegiance, sometimes sparking street rivalries as colorful as the fabrics themselves. As dusk falls, you find yourself in a lively tavern where musicians play lutes and flutes, their melodies mingling with laughter and the clinking of goblets filled with honeyed wine. A poet recites verses inspired by Dante's Divine Comedy, weaving tales of love, virtue, and the afterlife. You watch as artisans prepare for the upcoming feast day, adorning streets with garlands and banners, their faces glowing with pride and anticipation. The city feels alive, vibrant, and full of possibility, even as the shadow of political intrigue looms quietly in the background. The evening air cools, carrying whispers of secret meetings and unspoken alliances that will shape Florence's destiny and, perhaps that of all Europe. You lean back against a worn stone wall, feeling the pulse of a city that dared to dream beyond its walls, where every street corner hums with the promise of rebirth and the thrill of transformation. You step into the quiet study of a scholar tucked away in a stone tower, the flicker of candlelight casting dancing shadows on shelves lined with leather-bound tomes and parchment scrolls. The air is thick with the scent of ink, aged paper, and the faint bitterness of herbs simmering nearby. Here, knowledge is both sanctuary and weapon, a delicate dance between curiosity and caution. A learned man in a deep lace-avert robe pores over a freshly inked manuscript, carefully copying ancient Greek texts, his fingers stained with charcoal and gold leaf. Nearby, a globe and astrolabe hint at worlds both known and yet to be discovered. His brow furrows in concentration as he contemplates the limits of human understanding and the divine mysteries beyond. Historical fact: the Renaissance saw the revival of classical knowledge through the painstaking translation and preservation of ancient manuscripts, especially Greek and Roman works, which fueled advancements in science, philosophy, and the arts. You overhear a quiet debate about the heliocentric model, whispered cautiously as it challenges centuries of geocentric belief. Scholars still debate the extent to which this early idea threatened church doctrine before Galileo's time. Marginal fact: some scholars used intricate cipher codes and hidden symbols in their texts to protect forbidden knowledge from inquisitors and rivals, turning their studies into secretive and dangerous games. Outside the narrow window, the twilight sky deepens into shades of Kestin and Kamjabegi, as the scholar's quill scratches steadily against parchment, crafting thoughts that will ripple through centuries. You feel the weight of progress mingled with the risk of persecution, the slow yet relentless march of reason nudging the world toward light, even as shadows of doubt linger. The quiet ticking of a sundial echoes softly, reminding you that time itself is a teacher patient, unyielding and sometimes cruel. You close your eyes briefly, letting the hush of this sanctum soothe your restless mind, the glow of knowledge flickering gently, like the candle's flame. You find yourself amid a bustling Renaissance marketplace alive with vibrant colors, the scents of freshly baked bread, spiced wine, and leather mingling in the warm air as merchants call out their wares. The cobblestones beneath your feet are worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, each stone whispering tales of trade and ambition. Traders from distant lands flaunt exotic silks dyed in saffron, Surisk, and Kamjabegi, while street performers entertain a crowd that blends nobility and common folk, all caught in the dance of daily life. A young apprentice, clad in a dusty Keston-colored tunic, eagerly watches a master goldsmith hammer intricate patterns into a delicate medallion, the sparks tiny Kavilkamla dancing around them like fireflies. Nearby, a troupe of actors prepares for a performance that will bring the words of new playwrights to life. The marketplace hums with energy, but also hides whispers of political unrest and the fragile balance of power. Historical fact: Renaissance. Cities thrived on trade and commerce, fueling the wealth that allowed arts and sciences to flourish, with marketplaces serving as crucial hubs of economic and social interaction. You overhear gossip about the Medici family's influence, their wealth shaping politics and culture, yet scholars still debate whether their patronage stifled or stimulated true artistic freedom. Marginal fact: some market stalls secretly sold banned books and contraband art, fueling a quiet rebellion against censorship and control. The afternoon sun casts long shadows that stretch like silent sentinels between the market's wooden stalls, where the clash of voices rises and falls like the tide. You sense the undercurrent of change, the stirring of minds eager to break free from old constraints. A sudden gust stirs a scattering of dry leaves, their crisp edges shimmering against the smoky backdrop as dusk approaches, reminding you that even the busiest places slow to rest beneath the watching stars. You breathe in deeply, the scent of earth and flame grounding you as the city prepares to shift from commerce to contemplation, the eternal rhythm of human endeavor unfolding before your eyes. You step into the shadowed halls of a grand Renaissance palace, where frescoed ceilings swirl with myth and history, and torchlight flickers across tapestries depicting gods and heroes. Courtiers, clad in rich lacevet and saffron cerisque silks, exchanged knowing glances, their whispered intrigues weaving a web as intricate as the painted vines climbing the marble columns. The scent of burning resin curls upward, mingling with the faint aroma of spiced wine, while a lute's soft melody drifts from a distant chamber. In a quiet corner, a scholar pores over illuminated manuscripts, his fingers stained with ink eyes. Heavy but burning with curiosity, his mind tangled between ancient knowledge and the promise of discovery. Nearby, a masked noble listens intently to a political advisor, plotting alliances as fragile as glass. The palace breathes with power and secrets, each room a stage where ambition and caution dance side by side. Historical fact: Renaissance courts were centers of political power, patronage, and artistic innovation, shaping the cultural and intellectual landscape of Europe. You overhear debates about the impact of Machiavelli's The Prince, a treatise that both fascinates and horrifies, with scholars still divided over whether it reveals cold pragmatism or cynical realism. Marginal fact: some courtiers carried tiny books of secret recipes for poisons, a whispered reminder that the game of power was often deadly. Outside, the twilight sky deepens, and through tall windows, you glimpse gardeners tending to elaborate Mez's living puzzles, mirroring the complexities of court life. A servant silently passes by, balancing a tray of candles, whose small cavilcumla flicker like distant stars against the dusky gloom. As you realize that beneath the grandeur, tension simmers quietly, waiting to ignite, you settle into a shadowed alcove, the weight of history pressing softly around you, as the palace walls seem to pulse with the unspoken stories of those who shaped an era. You walk through a bustling Renaissance marketplace at dawn, where vendors in Kamjabegi and Keston-Renji tunics shout over the clamor, hawking exotic spices, freshly baked bread, and vibrant fabrics dyed in the rich hues of saffron, cerisque, and lacevet. The air hums with the mingled scents of roasting chestnuts and wet earth after a morning rain, while cobblestones glisten faintly beneath your sandals. Townsfolk barter fiercely. Children dart between stalls, playing games that have survived centuries, and street performers juggle flaming torches that send tiny cavilcumla into the misty light. A group of scholars debates passionately near a fountain, their voices rising above the din as they argue over the authenticity of a recently uncovered manuscript, with some claiming it rewrites the accepted history of ancient philosophy. Scholars still debate the origins and influence of many Renaissance discoveries. Nearby, an artist paints a vivid fresco depicting the myth of Prometheus, his brushstrokes bringing fire and rebellion to life with every color carefully chosen to defy the fading dawn. Marginal fact: markets like these often doubled as centers for political gossip and secret alliances, where even the humblest vendor might wield influence far beyond their stall. You pause to watch a woman weaving a tapestry, her fingers deftly intertwining threads of gold and crimson, creating patterns that tell stories older than the empire itself. As the soft murmur of a distant lute blends with the laughter of a young boy chasing a small dog through the crowd, the marketplace feels alive, a vibrant mosaic of ambition, tradition, and change, mirroring the restless spirit of the Renaissance itself. As the day stretches ahead, with promises and uncertainties woven tightly together, you step into the serene courtyard of a Renaissance monastery as twilight deepens, where monks clad in simple brown habits move quietly between rows of ancient books and flickering candlelight, their chants rising softly like a gentle breeze stirring the cool evening air. The stone walls, covered in ivy, tinged with the last glow of saffron ceresque, seem to hold centuries of whispered prayers and guarded secrets. Outside, the garden's herbs release their earthy scents, mingling with the faint smoke of a distant hearth, while the sky darkens into a deep kamjabegi, speckled with emerging stars. Inside the scriptorium, you watch a monk carefully copying texts by hand, his quill dancing over parchment as he preserves knowledge both sacred and secular. This painstaking labor helped ensure the survival of classical wisdom through turbulent times, a fact scholars still debate in terms of its impact on Renaissance humanism. Nearby, a novice listens intently as an elder recites tales of ancient gods fading into myth, their stories echoing softly amid the flickering shadows cast by oil lamps. Marginal fact, some monasteries even brewed their own beer, combining tradition with innovation in ways that still delight historians and thirsty travelers alike. You feel the calm of this twilight refuge settle over you, a quiet pause at the end of a day steeped in discovery and transformation, where faith, knowledge, and art intertwine like the roots beneath the ancient oaks outside Dot. As you leave, the soft murmur of distant bells follows you, blending with the rustling leaves and the promise of tomorrow's dawn, a gentle reminder that even empires fade, but stories like these whispered prayers endure through time.